I'd like to welcome you to our Ask the Advisor session. Periodically, we do sessions where we're encouraging people to come with their burning questions. And of course, this one follows the Rachel Reeves autumn budget. And our clients have already started to ask us some questions. So we thought we'd bring some of those to the session. And of course, if you have any questions that you want to pose, you can either pop them in the chat or we'll be inviting you to speak up if you feel like it in a couple of minutes. Okay, we do have a few links to give you to sources of information that we thought were useful. We'll pop those in at the end of the broadcast. And I am pleased to say that there are several of the money mentors here with me. So the bits of the budget that I haven't got my head around, I'm hoping they'll be able to help with if your questions get really tricky. But I'm Sam Seckham. I'm also kind of hashtag Savvy Sam on social media and the Moral Money columnist for The Telegraph. And I'm a founder of Women's Wealth, where we're passionate, absolutely passionate about empowering women to create their own fabulous financial futures, which, by the way, is the name of our podcast, if you wanted to have a little listen to that. I'm a chartered financial planner. I'm a fellow of the Personal Finance Society, decades of experience and on a mission to be useful. We've invited people to pose questions, and there is lots of speculation pre-budget. So we've got some questions already. But the stuff that came up in the speculation before the budget, about, changing the ISA, like capping and reducing and doing horrible things to ISAs. Maybe the lifetime allowance was going to get reinstated. Do you remember Conservative axed it and Labour said they were going to put it back, and turns out they didn't. And reducing tax, reducing the gifting allowances on giving things away during your lifetime to increase the inheritance tax take. That was another thing. And the tax-free cash on pensions. I promise you there hasn't been a budget in a decade where they haven't said that that's going. But some of the things that I thought might come up where hopes have been dashed was sort of making the child benefit claim process fairer, so that it wasn't dependent on just one person's earnings in a family, but took the whole family income into account. There was promise, or they mooted last time, the Conservatives did, that they would do something about the cliff edge there, but they're kind of not really done anything. And then some headlines that really matter, I think, to the women's wealth community. And I think it's important for me to say that we're personal finance orientated here. And a lot of what's going on in the budget is really not about personal finance. It's about fund managers on carried interest. It's about the second property ownership and its impact on the housing market and things like this. So they're not so much personal finance issues, although of course we'll comment on them to the extent that we're aware of them. So pensions will be considered part of total estate on death for inheritance tax calculations from 2027. I think that was the big one, but when they said it, I thought, oh, I'm going to be having some conversations with my clients about that one, because it is a fact. And one of the questions that was posed to me already is, you said that I should keep my pensions till last because they're IHT free. What are we going to do now? So that is going to be a question that comes up, I think, with our members. Stamp duty land tax paid on the purchase of property. The thresholds here are reverting back to pre-COVID levels. So again, be careful with the language you use. Don't fizz yourself up into some frenzy that's not justified. These rates were eased over COVID to assist people in moving, and they're going back to what they were before that. So it's kind of, it's not the end of the world. I know it makes it harder, but first-time buyers have still got a £300,000 threshold tax-free, whereas the rest of us have got 125,000. And then, of course, the rates, especially for those who own second properties. Now, this is an area I think that the government is getting a little bit tougher, because they're basically leveling the playing field a bit. It's been tax advantageous for landlords for quite a while, and they've slowly closed down those advantages. And this is a tax which is designed to say, do we really want lots of Airbnb properties in a seaside town, or do we want people to be able to afford to live there? So it's a question of, making it a bit harder for investors who are buying property to earn money out of it, to displace kind of the housing stock that perhaps should be for people to live in. So they're making it a little bit less tax friendly to own second property as some sort of investment. Capital gains tax has gone up. So it used to be 10% for basic rate taxpayers, going up to 18%. And for higher rate taxpayers, it's up to 24%. So that's a significant change. But we were talking about it before this session, and one of the things that I think capital gains tax needs, why we need to bring it onto everybody's radar, is that the allowances have come down so drastically. So we've now got a situation where markets are rising and allowances have come down. So many people are going to be doing tax returns to declare gains on their capital if they sell anything for the first time. This might happen if you've got a general investment account where you're kind of like selling some of it down, maybe to move into your ISA. And that process might cause a capital gains tax implication that you're going to have to declare to HMRC and pay the taxes on. And if you're not used to doing that, then you might need some help and guidance to get you through that the first time. For those of us who want to drive around in our large vehicles, swigging beer that we've bought from the pub, and vaping, we've got 2 of those are the frozen duties, and one of them they're going to introduce tax on. So whatever we're doing kind of in our personal life and for fun, flying, as long as we're not doing it in a private jet, it's not too bad. That the passenger duty is £2 a head for economy class. So it kind of depends where you are and what you're doing, whether you've been affected by any of those freezes or introductions of tax. So personal finance wise, I think pensions, they didn't take the tax-free cash away, but they did introduce the IHT on the value. Stamp duty, we're going back to pre-COVID levels, so it's going to affect more people. Capital gains tax is one that's going to be affecting more people for the first time as well. So those are things that are changing that we need to be aware of. So do we have anybody in the audience who wants to pop in a question at this moment in time? Carolyn's going to keep an eye on the messages for me and let me know if there's anything that needs my attention in there. We can get to that. Or I can start with some of the questions that we've been asked by our clients already. So does anybody want to jump in? Ask a question?
I have a question about, and I think we're probably going to cover it. So about the kind of income tax increases. Oh, sorry. Let me read the comment in the chat, actually. Someone's put, interested to hear about pensions changes, which
okay.
you just covered. So maybe go for that one and I'll come back.
Okay, all right. Okay, Selina. So interested to hear about pension changes. Okay, so the pension changes, I think there's more didn't change that was forecast to change than did change, to be honest. The only thing that I'm aware of that's changed significantly, and of course it hasn't actually changed yet, we've got until 2027 before the value of pension pots that you still own at the point of your death are going to be added to the rest of the things you own. And if that takes you over the inheritance tax nil rate band threshold, then you're going to end up paying inheritance tax on it. So at the moment, you can pass on £325,000 worth of assets without paying inheritance tax. It's called the nil rate band. And we always enjoyed the fact that pensions didn't count as an asset for that calculation. There is a bit more easement. You've got another 175,000. of your principal main residence if you own your home and you're leaving it to direct descendants. So that's kind of £500,000, £175,000 of your home, 325,000 free anyway. And then on top of that £500,000, your pension pots weren't included. So whenever we were working with our clients, we used to say, well, you know, if we've got a pot of money, whatever the amount that is, and we're going to spend it last because it's the what if I need long-term care? What if something happened to my health that I needed to chuck some money at? I could keep a pot of money in my pension and I could draw that down under those circumstances. And then if I died still owning it because I didn't need it, goes to the kids or to my husband or whatever, without consideration for inheritance tax. So that was always a great way of us putting contingency funds aside and not aggravating the inheritance tax bill. That's gone now, it seems. I don't quite know how, because pensions are effectively what we call a trust. So I don't know that they're going to change trust law, because that would be massive. So I'm guessing there's going to be some sort of death tax charge introduced on pension pots, which references the value of the estate. But they will tell us how this is going to work, and give the pension industry time to get systems and controls in place to manage this calculation, and it will apply from 2027, so we understand. So much still to learn about exactly what the mechanics of this are going to be, but the intention is clear. No more are we going to be passing on pots to the next generation inheritance tax free just because they're accumulated in our pension. And these can be significant amounts of money, the contingency pots that we often have set aside for long-term care and things are often a few £100,000, if not £500,000, so that's a lot of inheritance tax at 40%, if that's going to be included in the calculation. So what can you do about it? Live forever. That's plan number one. Number two is kind of bite the bullet. You'll be dead anyway. So like they get what they get, net of tax. Number three is give it away during your lifetime, so as you don't own it. But that means drawing it out of the pension, doesn't it? And if you draw it out of the pension, you're going to have income tax consequences for doing that. So I think it's going to depend on your personal income tax position, because if you already have very considerable income, you're going to pay 45% income tax to get it out. So, there's an argument for saying pay the 40% by leaving it in. So there's a calculation to be done and managed for everybody. I think it puts annuities back on the map. For those of you who are unfamiliar with annuities, that's where you kind of exchange your pension pot for an income, and that income is guaranteed for the rest of your life. So these really suit people who are risk averse and who really need income rather than a capital pot. But if you're going to set up a program of gifting to the next generation, which is exempt from inheritance tax because it's covered by your normal income, then an annuity might be a good way of bumping your normal income up and then giving the money away to the kids or the next generation, exempt, because if it's not out of capital, it's not a gift, it's spending. So there is a way of managing that so as you can convert your pension into income and then give it away during your lifetime. But there'll be income tax consequences. So it depends. We tend not to let the tax tail wag the financial planning dog. So it's about talking to you about what you want to achieve with your assets during your lifetime. But then it's finding the most tax efficient way of actually executing that plan. So that's when we would do the calculations and decide which way was best to do it. I do think it's important to keep this in perspective a little bit as well, because before pension freedoms in 2015, there was a 55% death tax charge if you took a pension as a lump sum on death, so 40% still looks low compared to that. And I guess I'm showing I'm long in the tooth, aren't I, by saying, and pensions I don't think pensions should ever have become an estate planning tool. I think that was an accidental consequence of the changes to the death treatment of pensions when they went into pension freedoms, and they're redressing that balance now. Pension pots were designed to encourage people during their working life to set money aside to spend when they're no longer working and earning. And I think we're just moving back towards that being a tax efficient way of using them, and sort of shutting the door on this estate planning process that has crept into pensions, although they have been a very handy way of putting a contingency pot aside for long-term care. And I think we might be thinking about other ways of doing that going forward. So does that answer the question with pensions? We've still got the same reliefs on pensions. We've still got the same tax-free growth on pensions. We've still got the tax-free cash. We've still got the limits on what we can pay in. None of those changed in the budget. What changed was this treatment on death. So I hope that kind of helps explain where I think we are with that now. And I've got another question in here. I'm trying to decide if it's worth topping up my NI contributions, as I still have 7 years before I can access my pension. My issue is that I feel it might be wasted because of the government in the future brings in new testing. I'm sure they won't give it to me anyway. Can you comment on this? I've completely empathise with everybody who thinks, you know, when I'm trying to plan long term and they keep changing the flipping rules, it's kind of, it makes it hard. It makes me hard to trust that the system is going to look the way in the future as it does now. So I can make a decision now thinking that's the case, and then all of a sudden it's not. So I really do sympathise with you there. I don't think that they don't tend to change things like state pension requirements without giving you 10 or more years notice of a change. So you being within 7 years, I think, is something to consider. And the contract that the government normally has with people who are paying NI and pensions is to give them that 10-year plus warning. So if you think about it, when they change the state pension age, the state retirement ages, and what have you, they give you a long lead-in time so that you can plan for that change. I'm not sure that I could do this. You know, I don't know I don't know your personal circumstances, and there is an argument that says if you're on the cusp of being eligible for some benefits like pension credit, you can do yourself an injustice by suddenly saving and just flipping yourself over that threshold. But for the majority of the members of Women's Wealth, we're not close to those thresholds. We're creating bigger pots for ourselves in retirement, and so we don't end up, you know, qualifying for things like pension credit. We're providing pension pots for ourselves, and there's nothing that I've seen in the budget which would indicate we shouldn't still be doing that. The only thing that I've noticed in the budget is that we shouldn't be treating pensions as an estate planning tool. Everything else pretty well looks the same to me. So yeah, if you're talking about paying back NI that you owe so that you qualify for a full state pension, normally, and this is just normally, not you personally, normally when we do that calculation, we end up saying it's a good buy. That applies if you're in normal health and you're close to retirement age, because if you hand over a lump sum to buy back pension years and then you don't survive to state pension age, there's no refund. So the closer you are to that retirement age, the more likely we would be to say yes, buy those added years, they look like good value, especially if you have a normal life expectancy. So I hope that's useful. That was for Kelly. Definitely wouldn't qualify for you. Okay, 10 years guidance is helpful. Okay, good. Thanks, Kelly. And then do you think, so this is Dahlia, do you think there will be a way to claim back the VAT on school fees if you have a business where you can claim back VAT? No. I don't. I don't know, Sifa, whether you've got any ideas around this?
I don't think I also don't think so, because I don't think they'll consider school fees as a sort of an allowable business expense. So obviously when they're looking at you know, sort of the things that you can, there are allowable and things that are not allowable. But there are some products, aren't there? So for example, if you're setting up, people ask us about our fees, don't they, sometimes, and the cost of setting up pensions and things like that. And so some of those costs can you can, but I can't see how this one we'd that there'd be justification, because it would be very hard to, I think, to make the link between how your children would be linked to a business, really, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's going to end up being a real cost for parents who are sending children to private school in their personal budgets. So.
Yeah. But obviously the government has confirmed now, hasn't it, that it's going to happen obviously in January. So I think many schools, though, are going to see how much and they're going to pass on. So it may not be the full 20%.
I think that brings me to another one of the questions that was asked by our members about whether because this is my thinking around whether the NI increases, so the people who are paying, who are really shocked by the budget in terms of the cost implications, are businesses where the national insurance threshold, so the threshold at which they start paying employer national insurance on employee wages has halved, and the rate has gone up. So they're going, oh my God, this is really expensive. And our clients have been saying to us, now bearing in mind that when our audience will have employers, employees, business owners and investors in businesses, like in it. So we've got 4 sets of stakeholders, really, and the national insurance increase is going to be quite onerous on businesses. And my members are saying, but it's going to really crush the opportunity for pay rises, because the businesses, you know, whatever surplus was in the business, and they were looking at sharing it between the stakeholders, so the employees, the consumers. Maybe we can bring prices down and have better, cheaper products. Maybe we can pay our staff more. Maybe we can pay higher dividends. These are the stakeholders in the business. And now that the costs have gone up from effectively an exogenous force, an outside force, so all business costs have gone up, I think maybe all of the stakeholders in that business are going to end up sharing that burden. So rather than it simply be costs have gone up, so prices will go up to protect profits, maybe prices won't get passed on, which is your point, Sifa, with the VAT on school fees. Maybe not all of it will get passed on. Maybe some of it will be absorbed by the business. Will staff get no pay rises because of the NI increases? No, I don't think that'll happen either, because, you know, businesses can't afford to lose talent. They need to pay people. And of course, we have this situation where the costs of everything have gone up. So with the cost of living increase that we've experienced, we are in a situation where if our wages don't go up, we get poorer, and then we end up having to think about moving jobs because you know, because of the situation that we find ourselves in. Does anybody else have any thoughts on whether wages will be going up or not in the future?
I was going to post a link to Sifa's article about how to negotiate your salary into the chat, because I was thinking a lot of that is about how your salary depends on the value that you can provide to businesses. And so while businesses might struggle in the face of that rise in employers' NI, they still want to keep you as an individual. So that article is good in setting out the things that you can do to negotiate a salary increase for yourself.
Yeah, good idea, Simon, if you can find that link. So yeah, I don't think we should assume that our pay as employees is the thing that's gone under the bus because NI has gone up. I think it needs to be shared as an increased cost burden in a business by the other stakeholders as well. But it will depend on how well you can negotiate, won't it? So like, it's a good point. I think we all need to acknowledge the fact that we've all been affected by fiscal drag. So a client of mine, when I mentioned fiscal drag, thought it might be something to do with RuPaul's Drag Race, as I say, but it's not. It's this business of like the inflation sees everything going up in price. Our earnings should go up, especially if we negotiate well. But the thresholds at which we start paying tax and then moving to higher rates of tax aren't going up. So effectively, more and more of our income is ending up in the tax brackets and the higher tax brackets at that. So that is impacting all of us. And there was talk of these freezes on the personal allowance and the income tax thresholds staying in place. But actually, Rachel Reeves has said that 2028 is when they're going to revert back to being index linked. I think it's very generous to call these allowances index linked, because you can't freeze them for 4 years and then give them an inflation increase for that year and call it index linked. You know, you'd need to raise those thresholds to recognise inflation for the 4 years it was frozen for it to be index linked. So like, you know, I think we have to accept that the cost of a civilized society is tax. And if we want better health services, better schools, better policing, then it is a fact of life, isn't it, that we are going to end up having to pay more tax for it. Looking at the bigger picture on this, and I don't want to go too far into it because I'm not a policy person. I'm a personal finance person, but we are paying, you know, we have a bigger tax burden and a bigger spending budget than we've ever had before. So if this works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. So it does seem like quite a gamble, and the numbers are quite big. So I think that's where we are in terms of the economics and the governing of this country. They needed to do something quite dramatic, and they have. And we need to see whether it pays off. There is some doubt in the markets as to whether the growth that it's supposed to stimulate will happen. But the bond market is holding up. So it does look as if they believe the numbers are doable. So we'll see. We'll see. I think there'll be one of the questions I had was about interest rates on Thursday. And I think what happens to the interest rate on Thursday will be quite an indicator of how the market's feeling and how the Bank of England are feeling about the budget. The markets are still pricing an 80% likelihood of a 0.25% interest rate decrease on Thursday. The caveat there is that before the budget, it was 92% likelihood. So the likelihood has reduced, but it's still likely that we're looking at an interest rate cut on Thursday. The impact of that is good news for people borrowing money and bad news for savers. So it depends where you are on that spectrum, how you feel about that news. Although I agree, it's also making me hesitant to ask for a pay rise. Lots to consider. Okay. I think this is a real issue. Additional squeeze they hadn't anticipated, which will impact on their profit and loss significantly. I do think we'll need to find a way to minimise costs, and it will ultimately impact wages and all other fixed variable costs. Yeah, no doubt about it. But you know, we knew the cost of living was punishing us all, businesses as well. And this exogenous, this outside influence on businesses is significant. It is significant, and it's going to impact. I think I did some calculations. My sister runs a nursery, and she has a number of minimum wage staff there. You know, they run there's a soft play area and a cafe, and she was saying it's really going to hurt. Am I going to be able to afford to carry on because the minimum wage has gone up and the NI has gone up and all the rest of it? But there's actually also a doubling of the allowance for small businesses before you have to actually pay the NI from 5,000 to 10,500, I think. And when we did the sums for her, it really didn't put her NI bill up very much. She has like 3 or 4 minimum wage staff, and she was terrified that the increase was going to cripple her, but actually it didn't put her bill up very much at all, because there is this protection for small businesses in there where you get a certain amount of your NI bill is excused, and they doubled that. So that's going to work for some people as well. So Carolyn's put another link in the message box there for anyone who wants a one-to-one chat to book a 15-minute call with us. We're very happy to have a chat about what we do here, and let people know how we might be useful to them in our membership services. I'm just checking to see whether got any more messages before I pick
We
up.
have. Do you want me to read it out for you?
Yeah, please.
It says, hello, this is from Vivi. Hi, Vivi. Hello, my question is around stamp duty. I
Okay.
appreciate your comment that it's gone back to pre-COVID levels and that it's not the end of the world. This is a reframe that's going to help me going forwards. I'm looking to purchase my second property next year. I now have to look at these thresholds more closely to make it affordable. I appreciate you might not know this, but in general, how do you think this stamp duty increase might affect the market as a whole? Is real estate ownership still a good vehicle for investment? You mentioned the government are suggesting pensions aren't an estate planning tool. So now wondering what is, if real estate is going to be heavily taxed.
Okay. Well, for a start, real estate was never a good inheritance tax or estate planning tool. It's always been one of the lumpiest, most difficult things to transition without shed loads of tax, unless it's your principal main residence. So I don't think anything to do with real estate ownership is less or more inheritance tax friendly than it was before. Pensions, of course, you've never been able to own residential property in pensions. So that's never been, you've never been able to, get better estate planning by doing your residential property in your pension. That's never been possible. So I don't think those two things, pension or real estate, are that closely linked. So the effects of stamp duty, when I was reading the HMRC, Carolyn will put a link in the thing there, the government, .gov.uk launched a policy statement, executive summary of what they're trying to achieve with the budget. And one of the things was to protect the housing stock for residential people, for people to buy and own homes, rather than it to be purchased by people who are buying additional property to run businesses from. So whether that's letting them out buy to let or short-term letting like Airbnb, they wanted to have a tax system that made that less attractive. And there has been a tax system which made it more attractive for people, especially buy to let, over a couple of decades. It was hopelessly in favour of landlords, and that caused a disparity in the housing stock. So we're now getting to a situation, I think, where there are other investments, you're right, that are just as tax efficient and much more liquid than second properties that you could invest in as an alternative. And you should take advice on it. Property, it's hard to own property, especially in the UK, for any long period of time and lose money. It's an island, we're short of space, property values go up. Letting property is if you want to be a landlord, God bless you. But there's lots of demand to let property. So it's hard to lose money owning property, but it's not easy to own property. It's not easy to run property. The tax burden is getting very much bigger than it used to be. And because property is so illiquid, you can't sell one room one year, another room the next year, and another room the year after. You sell it all in 1 year and bam, all that tax lands in the same year. Whereas if you'd bought a portfolio, you could sell a quarter of it 1 year, a quarter of it another year, a quarter of it the following year. So you've got that liquidity to manage your tax over a period of time. Any assets you can wrap in trust, and that would allow you to keep them out of your estate for the inheritance tax calculation and have them belonging to, or but not controlled yet by, the next generation. We do inheritance tax planning where we set up trusts for people. Trusts are complicated, trusts are not cheap. So you're probably not going to think about doing this unless your estate is already going over the thresholds and what have you by kind of 500,000 or so. But then it does sort of get to the stage where it's probably worth thinking about setting up a trust, transferring some assets into it, and not perhaps giving it to the next generation yet. You stay in control of the management of it, but they are the ultimate beneficiaries of it, and you pass it on to them as and when you think they're ready to handle it and take responsibility for it. That way, if you survive that gift by 7 years, it's out of your estate. And they didn't do anything to reduce the generosity of those 7-year gifting rules. They still remain open to us as a planning tool. So it is worth talking to a financial planner if you're in the frame of mind where you want to create assets, but you don't necessarily want them in your name. You want them in the name of a trust or somebody else, so that the inheritance tax burden doesn't fall on your death. So there is lots of estate planning you can still do. Pensions were offering us an easy option. Trusts take a little bit more effort to set up. Pensions are effectively trusts, but they were already created. So you might have to create your own trust if you want to do some inheritance tax planning now. I'm going to just have a little review of the questions that I had been asked before. So we've talked about that one. We've talked about fiscal drag, pensions. I think probably that's all the questions that had come through before the session. Thank you for those who have contributed questions during the session as well. We are in the last 5 minutes. So are there any final questions before? Carolyn, anything else come in?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say thank you then to everybody who's contributed. I really appreciate that the content that is most useful to you is answering the questions that you've got, having watched the budget. So thank you for that. There's a date for your diary. So we're doing a Finance on Friday session on the 29th of November at 12 noon, and we're covering the financial well-being. So, what is that? How do you get it? And if you're interested in thinking about your financial well-being, we'll be very pleased to see you on that session, and Carolyn will put a link in. And the next Ask the Advisor session is coming up on the 13th of March. So another date for your diary. Ask any questions that you'd like covered in that session. It's been great to hear what's on your minds. We want to continue to be your best financial friend and be useful to you. And if everyone's happy, I'm going to say goodbye at that.